Kettering Health Hamilton is proud to be the broadcast sponsor of the Celebrating Self series. Kettering Health Hamilton, be your best.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and welcome to the Fitness Center for Creative Arts. My name is Ian Mackenzie Thurley. I'm the Executive Director here. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to another installment of Celebrating Self. We are presenting today a woman of no importance, an incredible, Did I hear applause there? No. There we go. That was from the One City, One Book team, I'm sure. An amazing book by Sonia Purnell. I would like to thank, as ever, our sustaining funders in the Hamilton Community Foundation, the City of Hamilton, ArtsWave in Cincinnati, and the Ohio Arts Council for the great support of the arts here in Hamilton and throughout the great state of Ohio. Please do put your hands together for them. To our series sponsor, Kathy Klink, thank you so much for everything you do for us here at the Fitness Center and for the Celebrating Self series. For our event sponsors today, the Timmers, Steve and Linda Timmer, thank you so much. As I speak about great community partners, great community leaders and involvement, we do have a fantastic exhibition coming up. It is We is Greater Than Me. It is the 17 Strong exhibition that will be opening here on Saturday, the 19th of October. That's going to be an incredible night through all of our galleries representing every single neighborhood in Hamilton and reflecting back here at the Fitness Center. Hamilton High will be in our community galleries, and we've got a great show in the theater that night, which is a back-to-Mac Fleetwood Mac show. So lots going on at the Fitness Center, but really a great community event with We is Greater Than Me, and we'd love to see you here for that opening, and that exhibition will run all the way through till January. As I am thanking some more of our friends, we've got our great friends here at TV Hamilton who've got a live broadcast going with their partnership with Kettering Health Hamilton. We certainly appreciate all they do. How was lunch, everybody? Do we enjoy that? 2 women in a kitchen. They are incredible. I think I am eating with them every single day this week. And that's not a bad thing, except for my belly. But I'm lunch and dinner with them tonight. We've got Fit and Family Fridays. We have a wedding here on Saturday night. They look after us so very well, and all of our patrons, and we really do appreciate it. And speaking of partners who look after as well, could we have a huge round of applause for our friends at Hamilton High School Transitions team? They're up there, up the back. They really are incredible. It's a fantastic partnership. We love having them here and interacting with us and the community. It's a great partnership, and we're great to see that here for all of our Celebrating Self series. A little different today. We're back inside. We have people here for pickleball barbecue, which was fantastic fun. But as the weather closes in, we'd like to come back indoors, back into the ballroom, and a little less reliant on the weather, though. Of all the days, this one is absolutely perfect. Several of us were last night with the One City, One Book team for Sonia Purnell, who had come in to speak. So a huge congratulations to the One City, One Book committee who are with us today on an incredible book again this year. And a grand series of events. We really do appreciate it. They have been great partners for us over the years, as you've seen for our Celebrating Selves. Love to give up our Octobers and to have all of this city reading one book, working with our libraries, working with our kids, working with people of all ages to get them involved in literature. So when I had that call with Nikki Motley, I'm like, what are we doing this year? She goes, we've got a book. It's fantastic. And I'm like, what's it about? She goes, it's about a female spy. And I'm like, that's awesome, because I love it. When I was a kid, kids my age, at 10 or 12, were all reading the Tolkien. They were reading Lord of the Rings. They were reading Hobbit. I was reading John le Carré. True story, and I loved it. So I'm right there. And I said, well, what do we need for a speaker? And she goes, we just need to find an expert on spies who is also a woman here in the greater Hamilton area. I'm like, sure. And the fun thing about spies is they don't tell you that they're spies. So, are you a spy? No. Oh, okay. So that was a little challenging. But it just so happened, I'm a huge listener of podcasts. I don't know if there's any other podcast fiends in there, but I have a whole long list on my phone in my evenings. And one of the podcasts that I really love, because of my love of spycraft, is from the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. called Spycast. And I've been listening to this. And about a year or so ago, I heard a young lady who was working there at the Spy Museum and working as part of the production team for Spycast to come and talk about her and her career and what she'd been doing. And there was this young lady from Ohio. And I thought, she's amazing. Gosh, she's incredible. She's smart, intelligent. Why is she gone to D.C.? She should be staying back here in Ohio. And I actually had this conversation, true story, about a week later with the head of the Ohio Arts Council, saying we shouldn't be allowing them to go over the border. If we've got these incredible young talent, we shouldn't let them go. We've got to come back to Ohio. So all of this was back in my head about a year later to find somebody who could talk about, with authority, about spies, about history, and also happens to be a woman. And with that, I cold emailed the Spy Museum, and long story short, we got an incredible speaker for today. We have a fantastic book, an amazing speaker, and a wonderful event, and it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage from the International Spy Museum via Cleveland, Ohio, Miss Erin Dietrick.
Thank you. Ooh, I'm a little shorter than Ian. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for coming today. I'm really, really excited to be here and talk to you guys about spies, talk to you about female spies in World War II, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So before I came here, I thought a lot about what I wanted to tell you all about. So I know that you all have hopefully heard of the book Woman of No Importance, right? Most of you have the book or have read the book. Yeah. Okay, awesome. That's reason number one I'm here today is to tell you to read this book, and thank you so much to the folks at One City, One Book for choosing this book. Really, it is a fantastic book, and I've seen so many young women come into the Spy Museum inspired by this story. Come into the Spy Museum and want to learn more about Virginia Hall, want to see the artifacts that we have on her because they've read this book. So thank you for choosing it, and thank you for having me today here. I am very excited to speak to you all. So I wanted to talk... we're on still? So I wanted to talk about Virginia Hall, but I wanted to actually open the conversation up a little bit more to some other women of no importance during the Second World War. There were a surprising amount of women who served in the intelligence services during World War II, and I would love to introduce you all to some of them. But before we get there, I want to... almost forgot about my clicker. Here we go. So before we get there, I want to introduce you all to myself a little bit. As Ian said, I'm from Ohio. I'm from a small town outside of Cleveland called Twinsburg, Ohio. If you've heard anything about Twinsburg, you've probably heard about our Twins Days festival. It's very fun. It's the largest gathering of twins in the whole world, so it's what we're famous for. I am unfortunately not a twin, but my sister is a redhead, so we could kind of pass it off. So from Twinsburg, I went to college in New York. I went to college in Rochester, New York at the University of Rochester. I was always interested in history. I was always interested in the way that people engaged with history and learned about the people that came before us. Major, and my first job in a museum was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, Ohio. It was truthfully a life-changing experience. I've always loved music. I've always loved the history of music, and being able to share that with people, especially in Cleveland, was a privilege and an honor, and something I won't forget. It solidified the interest in me in sharing history with people from around the world, sharing stories that people don't know, sharing stories that people do know, but maybe sharing them in a different way. Unfortunately, that job was cut short by a little something called COVID, and I moved on to grad school in Washington, D.C. to study museum studies at the George Washington University. I studied museum studies, and while I was there, the first week I was there, I put in an application for the International Spy Museum because it was a job very similar to the job that I had done at the Rock Hall. It was basically a job in the museum showing people where things were, including the bathroom, where the bathroom was, where all the cool artifacts were, telling people stories in the museum. It was a job very similar. So I applied to that. I heard back, and I went in, and I got the job. And I was very excited. I didn't know anything about spies. Truthfully, I had not seen a single James Bond movie. Not a single one, and you have to blame my parents for that. I had not seen one. It's funny, in my interview, I was asked, hey, who's your favorite spy? And I said, oh gosh, I don't know. And I ended up saying the spy from, I had seen Hamilton like the week before the show, and I ended up saying the spy that is in Hamilton. I can't even remember his name now. But all that to say, truthfully, I had little to no knowledge about spies before I started working there. So I worked in the guest services department for about a year, and then I got involved with the Spycast podcast. So like Ian so kindly said, we are a podcast that's been running out of the Spy Museum for 16 years, which is a long time. That's basically the Jurassic period if you go back in podcasting terms. But the host of the podcast is a gentleman by the name of Andrew Hammond. He's the historian and curator of the museum. He is a wonderful person. And I happened to see him in the lunchroom one day, and I said, Andrew, my dad loves your podcast. And he said, you should come and work with me. I have an internship opening up. And I said, I would love to. So I did that. I did that for a couple of months, and they hired me to continue working on the podcast. And now I work on the education team. I work continuously producing the podcast, and I help produce a lot of our programs that we put on. As I was just telling our folks from TV Hamilton here, I moonlight as a spy camp counselor over the summer, which is a whole lot of fun. So I get to work with a lot of ages. I get to work with a lot of content, and it's just been an absolute pleasure, and I'm happy to be here talking to you guys about spies today. So, slow down. Okay, I'm talking fast. Okay, noted. So, first thing that I want to do is lay down a little bit of groundwork here. So this story that we're going to be talking about, Virginia Hall, we like to say at the Spy Museum that some of these stories that we tell are really, really fantastic. So fantastic that if you didn't know they were real, you would think that they were straight out of a movie. So I want to say 99% of the work of intelligence organizations today are not jumping out of planes. Not blowing up railroads like Virginia did. They are not parachuting into occupied territories. Most of the people working in intelligence today are working behind the desks, analyzing information that's coming in from a wide variety of sources. So this story I'm going to tell you guys today, and the stories of a bunch of other women, really are the 1% of spy stories. I don't want you leaving here today and thinking that all of the spies in the world are working like Virginia did. That is not true. She was an exceptional woman, and the other women I'll be talking about were the same. I want to lay down a little bit of why we talk about World War II when we talk about spies so much. World War II was really the first time that organized intelligence agencies came to be. So before World War II, there were so many spies. Spying is known as the second oldest profession. So as long as humans have been around, people have been spying on each other. You have spied on people that you know. If you've ever stalked somebody, you have spied on somebody. So spying has been around for centuries. World War II was the first time that organized intelligence agencies really came into being, and that was out of pure necessity to beat the Axis powers. SOE and the OSS, the Special Operations Executive, and the Office of Strategic Services, those coming out of Britain and the United States, were really the first intelligence agencies and were the precursors to MI5, CIA, all of the things that we know and love today. So that's why we know them as so important. All of the artifacts and images I'm going to show to you today are either collection pieces from our collection at the International Spy Museum, or they exist in the public domain, or I have noted the museum that they've come from. So everything that you'll see, most of it does exist at our museum, and I really encourage you all to come and see it in person. And lastly, as I've already said, please read this book. It really is fantastic, and I cannot tell the story of Virginia Hall nearly as well as Sonia can. So I really encourage you all to, after the presentation, pick up the book and read it for yourself. It's really fantastic. So let's get into a little bit of Virginia. So Virginia said about herself, not bad. Girl from Baltimore. She was from Baltimore. She was raised in a small town in Maryland. She was quite unlike most women of the time, or perhaps unlike the expectation for most women of her time. She loved the outdoors. She loved animals. She loved sports. She loved shooting guns with her brothers and her father. She loved all of the things that women weren't necessarily supposed to love. So in these photos, I love these photos because I think they can really show you her personality. And a lot of these photos kind of are a bit of a precursor to what would come later in her life. So in these photos, you can see her with animals from a very, very young age. She was 2 years old in that picture, about 20 in this picture down here. She's skiing in the Alps here. And then I love this photo from 1938. This is from her journal from when she was working in Estonia. It is a four-leaf clover, which I think is really charming because for a woman who was so confident in herself and so empowered, to pick up a four-leaf clover and put it in her journal, going to bring me luck for the next 5 years. I think it's just a really charming artifact. So I show these photos really to humanize Virginia and to show you that even as fantastical of a person that she was and how exceptional she was, how brave she really was just a person just like you and I. I find that a lot of times in history when we talk about women who existed 100 years ago, or even women that existed 50 years ago that are no longer with us here, it's hard to it's hard to see them just as humans, right? We see them sort of as storybook characters or as people out of movies. I think it's important to humanize them, and I think Virginia, she was just a woman who wanted to live her life authentically. She went to Paris when she was young to explore Europe and explore a different world. It really was a different world. In the 1920s, it was a place that was not segregated. It was a place where women could wear men's clothing. It was a place where women could drink freely, could smoke freely, could be wherever they wanted, and she absolutely loved it there. She spent a lot of time in Europe in the 1920s, a couple of years, and there she learned languages. She learned French, she learned Spanish, and those languages would come to help her a lot in the future. She also learned a lot about European politics, the good, the bad, and the very, very ugly. She saw that the rise of fascism was happening, and it was happening fast, and this was not something that she was going to let go on her watch. So this is sort of an outline of Virginia's time in intelligence services. She started out when the 1930s rolled around. Hitler came to power, and war was looming. She started out, and she knew that she wanted to serve. She knew she wanted to serve. She didn't exactly know how. So she started out actually at the American Embassy in Warsaw and at the U.S. Consulate in Turkey. At those places, she was a clerk. She was working at the desks. It didn't appeal to her so much. She wanted to be doing more. So she wanted to work for the State Department and go abroad. Unfortunately, in 1939 in Turkey, she got in a horrible hunting accident, literally shot herself in the foot, and that could only be healed by amputating her leg at the knee, unfortunately. So she lived the rest of her life with a wooden leg that she nicknamed Cuthbert. She had quite the sense of humor, and she was from that point on, she was not only a woman, but she was a disabled woman. So she was down 2 marks in the eyes of most men who were in power at the time. So after her hunting accident, she went back to the United States where she could get the care that she needed. She went back and lived with family. And she had many, many failed attempts to join the State Department. She passed all of her exams with flying colors, 100% on all of the exams that she needed, but she was not accepted into the State Department. Why? Well, there were 6 women in the organization out of about 1,600. And needless to say, there was not room for one more woman, especially not one more woman who was disabled and lived her life with a wooden leg. It should be noted that said wooden leg was not the fantastic prosthetics that we have today. It was quite literally a piece of wood that was strapped to her leg with leather straps. It was not comfortable. Imagine in hot weather, it gets very hot in the DMV area, it gets very hot and humid. It would scathe her legs, and they would bleed, and they would cause very, very bad pain to her legs when she would walk. Needless to say, she didn't mind it so much, and she continued on. She was very empowered to serve her country. She was very empowered to serve really, truly any country that she could, any country that would take her. So she moved on to France, and she served in the French Ambulance Corps. Driving vehicles. She could drive, which was something that was fairly uncommon for women at the time, especially uncommon for women with a prosthetic leg. It was very difficult to drive an ambulance around the streets of France with a prosthetic leg, but she did it anyway, and the French Ambulance Corps would take her. So she went there quite happily and served there for about a year. Via a twist of fate, she met a gentleman that was working for the British Special Operations Executive, which had been set up by Winston Churchill only a few months prior. She met him, and she expressed her interest, and at the time, truly, they were taking pretty much anybody that was willing to do this work. It was really, really dangerous work. So they were willing to take anybody who was willing to do that. So she went in and worked for the British Special Operations Executive. She went and worked undercover in France as a journalist. And she worked within the French resistance networks, sort of organizing a lot of the resistance operations. So she would organize parachute drops. She would help people break out of prisons, which is a really movie-worthy kind of, you'll have to read the book to get the full story on that. But she rescued drowned airmen. She did all of these wonderful things, and so much that the Nazis caught on, and they caught on pretty fast. They called her the limping lady of Lyon. They knew that, this is a question that I think might be on a lot of your brains, is how did she get away with all of this with a wooden leg? Wouldn't you think that it would be pretty easy to find her? That's the lady with the wooden leg. She did conceal it well. It's hard to conceal a very big, bulky wooden leg, so they did know that she had a prosthetic, and they called her the limping lady of Lyon, so they could see her, she wasn't necessarily in disguise all the time. So because of that, the British encouraged her to return back to London, and she did. It was getting very dangerous for her in France. The Nazis were quite literally on her tail. It was a cat and mouse game every single day. So she returned to London. She did a brief interlude in Spain, again working undercover as a journalist. And then she said, all right, well, I want to go back to France, but the British won't let me. So let me go and see if the Americans will let me. And they did, because again, the Americans, this is 1942 at this point, they were desperate for anybody who would go into occupied territory and try to help. So they took Virginia. This is the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. They took Virginia and were willing to send her back into France, where she went undercover as a milkmaid in the countryside of France. My favorite part about that story is that she filed down her teeth in order to make her teeth look more like a peasant from France. She had beautiful American teeth, and she said, you know what, that's going to give me away, so I'm going to file my teeth down. She was very committed to her craft, needless to say. So after her service in France, was working as a milkmaid, she was a radio operator. Again, radio operation is a critical piece of the puzzle in this time. I'll talk a little bit about it later. She continued her service post-war in the CIA for about 16 years after. So these are a couple of artifacts that we have. These are, of course, she was a woman of many, 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 many IDs. So I put up 4. This is 4 of many that I had to choose from, including an identification bracelet from when she was driving the ambulance in France. So what I love about this, really, is I show these to emphasize living your cover. right? Because you can't really tell from these photos, you can't tell which of these have been falsified. You can't tell which of these are real. You can't tell which of these were actual documents handed to her from the Estonians. You can't tell which are falsified documents from the French or from the Spanish. She carried around so many different IDs. She truly lived her cover. And the way that I kind of like to explain this in modern day terms is if you go into your wallet, all of the identification that you have in there, so your library card, your Costco card, all of your credit cards, all of those things that have your name on it and connect you to yourself, she had the same thing, but in terms of all of these different pieces of the puzzle. So it was very difficult for her, right? Because imagine her wallet to have French currency, not the currency of her home country or of England. She would have to have all of these different documents depending on the cover that she went by on that day, and she went by a lot of different covers, would have to have the correct documents that said this was who she was. It was incredibly challenging and an incredibly, incredibly fascinating thing that she had so many different documents telling the world who she was. And really, I don't know about you, I can't tell which of those is real and which of them is fake. So I love these. I think it gives you a kind of good idea of all of the different worlds that she inhabited. So I want to also talk a little bit about signals intelligence and radio operation during the Second World War. This was critical, like I said, a critical piece of the puzzle. This was really the only way that agents in occupied France and across Europe could communicate with their handlers back in the United States or in England or elsewhere. So think about it, back in the day, you could communicate via a letter, perhaps. You could communicate face-to-face. Both of those things could be very easily intercepted. Both of those things take a lot more time than a radio transmission. The problem with radio transmission, radio operators during the Second World War, there is a very sad statistic that about radio operators lasted typically about 2 weeks in the field before they were caught by the enemy. Average of 2 weeks. So why is that? This is the radio that Virginia used. This is not a small radio. It is not the radios that we have today. This would have weighted about 30 pounds. So imagine, Virginia wasn't a small woman. She was about 6 foot tall, and she was very strong, but carrying around 30 pounds across France, I mean, that is amazing. And they were usually disguised as luggage carriers, but if you get stopped by the Gestapo and say, "Open your luggage, please," you're caught. So radio operators, quite unfortunately, typically would only last a couple of weeks in the field, which is one of the reasons why it's so amazing that Virginia was able to last as long as she did and not get caught. This was one of the reasons, again, why the British didn't want to send her back into the field, because the Nazis were already on her tracks. They could hear radio interceptions. They could listen in. This is signals intelligence. They could tap into radio transmissions and hear. They could locate where a person was based on that radio signal within about 30 minutes of a person transmitting a signal. So these people who were radio operators had to move every single time they transmitted a signal back home to London, back home to New York, back home to D.C. They had to move to a different location in order to not be caught. They had to change their appearance. They had to completely change in a time of about 30 minutes. It's very difficult. It's very, very challenging, but it was absolutely critical to the Allied effort during the Second World War. So to wrap up Virginia, this is a beautiful painting by Jeffrey Bass that currently hangs in the CIA Museum in Virginia. Not Virginia Hall, Virginia the state. And after the end of the war, she was awarded a couple of medals. She was awarded a member of the Order of the British Empire for her courageous work during the resistance in the beginning of the war, and that was from the British. From the Americans, she was the only female civilian during World War II to receive the Distinguished Service Cross. This is Wild Bill Donovan here giving her the Distinguished Service Cross. You might think she got that award sort of in a ballroom like this with a lot of people. Nope, it was only her and about 2 other people. She was offered to be given the cross by the President of the United States, and she turned it down because she wanted to continue to serve. She wanted to continue to serve the CIA, and she said, if you give me this medal, if the President of the United States gives me this medal in a ballroom this big, I am not going to be able to ever go undercover again. So, quite humbly took the medal in a very, very small ceremony by the director of the CIA at the time. And she went on to work, as I said, for the CIA for another 16 years. She ended up retiring at the age of 60. Why? Because it was required to retire at the age of 60. I'm sure, honestly, that she would have served for much longer if that retirement age wasn't required. So she was an absolutely fantastic woman. And I wanted to share her story first and foremost because that is the topic of what we're talking about today. But I want to introduce you to a couple of other women from the Second World War that also served their time, and a couple of them served their lives for the Allied effort during the Second World War. So we're going to start with Violette Szabo. Absolutely stunning woman. She was of French and English ancestry. She was very, very young when the Second World War broke out. She was only 19. She married a gentleman named Etienne Szabo. He was a French gentleman who was serving in the French army. In 1942, Violette was working for the Auxiliary Territorial Service, which was the women's branch of the British Army. And her husband was unfortunately killed at the Second Battle of El Alamein in modern-day Egypt in 1942. She learned of his death while she was pregnant with their child. She gave birth to that child only a couple months later. She was taken out of the women's territorial service. She was sent to an aircraft facility where she was building parts, but it was not what she wanted to do. Violette, much like Virginia, Violette was much shorter, was much smaller, but she was surprisingly strong, and she had grew up very much like Virginia in a family that loved to hunt, that loved to be outdoors. She was a great shot, and Violette wanted to serve, especially after her husband was killed by the Germans in Egypt. She got recruited to work as a special operations executive in the F section, which is the French section. So they sent her into occupied France in 1944. Again, this is an incredibly dangerous job. Violette was trained to basically parachute into France to connect with the French resistance officers in the area that she was dropped, to get information from them, and then get out of there. And she successfully did it one time, and she would not be so successful the second time. Violette used a very interesting method of covert communication. Violette used poem code, which I would love to share with you all today because I think it is so fun. I think it's the fun methods of cryptology. So if I can use somebody as an example, I'm going to use you, sir, gentlemen here. You're going to be my agent, okay? And we're going to communicate via poem code. So poem code worked quite simply, actually, and it was only used during the Second World War because, unfortunately, it was quite easy to break. So me and this gentleman here, I am his handler, he is my agent. We are going to, prior to him dropping in occupied France, we're going to connect on a poem that we're going to use. So let's say I've picked out Robert Frost's Nothing Gold Can Stay. So we both know that poem, and us two are the only people that know that is the poem that we are using for covert communication. So the two of us have that poem in our brains. Now, I want to send him a message using poem code. So I want to send him a message that said, Erin was here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to pick out a couple of words from that poem. So say I pick out green, I pick out hardest, subsides, dawn, and stay, which are respectfully the 2nd, 7th, 23rd, 32nd, and 40th words of that poem. I am going to then write those words out. You see, all of the letters I have in order here. I'm going to assign each of those letters a number based on alphabetical order. So you can see I've got A is number 1. The next A in dawn is number 2, so on and so forth. So the two of us are going to both have that sort of written down, so you're going to know which letters correspond with which numbers. I would then send my agent here the code 2723 32, 32, 40. So you can add, an extra word in there if you want to really throw off the other people who are trying to crack your code, which corresponds to, again, which word in the poem you're going to use, and then the numbers that correspond to the letter within that poem. So I'm going to send my agent here this code, which means Erin was here. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay, so it's very complicated. It's very complicated. Very, very challenging. It is a very challenging code to work with for myself and my agent for a couple of reasons, right? You need to be able to remember that poem word for word. You need to be able to spell that poem completely correct. You need to be able to get all of those numbers completely correct. If you don't, your code doesn't mean anything, right? So this was good and bad. First of all, they never, ever used poems that were in the public knowledge. So they would never use a Robert Frost poem because, Germans possibly could know a Robert Frost poem, or they could know poems that were in the public domain. So they would always make up their own poems. Violette went on a second mission in 1944. Same thing as the first. She was dropped by parachute into occupied France. She had a poem that was agreed upon to use. This is that poem on the side. Beautiful poem, and it represents Violette's life so well. I'll read the poem to you all. I think it's very beautiful. It was a poem written to her by her handler. The life that I have is all that I have, and the life that I have is yours. The love that I have of the life that I have is yours and yours and yours. A sleep I shall have, a rest I shall have, yet death will be but a pause. For the peace of my years and the long green grass will be yours and yours and yours. Violette was captured by the Gestapo when she dropped into France that day. Stopped at a Nazi stop, and they were asked to open up all of their bags, and as I said before, they could be given up pretty easily, and she was. Unfortunately, her and 2 other agents were taken to Ravensbrück concentration camp, and they were assassinated, unfortunately, in 1945. This photo here is her daughter, Tanya, and Etienne's daughter, Tanya, who was born in 1942. This is her accepting her mother's George Cross that was given to her by the British Army for her service. And if you've ever seen the movie Carve Her Name with Pride, it is an old movie, but it is a great movie that is based on her life. Of course, it has a couple of inaccuracies, but it's great to honor Violette and the service that she did. She was a brave woman. She was a proud woman, and unfortunately, her life was cut very short. Next, we have Noor she was again a very young woman when the war broke out. Noor was actually a musician. She was a descendant of a 17th century Indian ruler. Her father was a Sufi preacher he kind of had a somewhat 70s vibe. He went around the country preaching love, peace, and music. And Noor kind of inherited a lot of those traits. So her family was, contrary to Violette and Virginia, they were actually quite anti-violence. But very similar to Virginia and Violette, Noor saw what was going on in the world, and she could not let that slide by, not on her watch. So she joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, which again is the Air Force version, or the women's version of the Air Force in Britain. And then she became a radio operator in 1943 for the Special Operations Executive. We've already talked about how dangerous it was to be a radio operator during this time. Like I said, most survived about 2 weeks. Noor survived 3 months. Was a fantastic radio communicator. In fact, it was she went through her training, and she was not her uppers didn't have a whole lot of confidence in her. Why? Well, like I said, Noor was a musician, and before the war, she was an author. She wrote children's fairy tales. Her first 20 Jakarta Tales. This was fascinatingly a children's book of stories telling acts of sacrifice inspired by the noble examples of others. A lot of this is kind of reminiscent of Aesop's tales. she put out this book slightly before the war, and she really had no experience. She wasn't like Violette and Virginia that she was at home hunting, doing sports, being outside. She, again, was a musician. She grew up in a non-violent family, but despite this, she wanted to serve. So like I said, her superiors didn't have a whole lot of confidence in her. So I don't know if you can read this here. This is her report after she went through training. It says, report, not overburdened with brains, which is a really nice way of saying, just a really creative way of calling somebody a little bit dumb. Nor was not dumb at all, and I love the comment here. We don't want them overburdened with brains, which I think a lot about what exactly that means, but we don't need to get into that. They also write about Noor that she was unstable and had a temperamental personality, to which the commenter said, nonsense. And I agree. Noor, like I said, 3 months transmitting messages in Paris. This is in downtown Paris. This is not in the outskirts of France where you could, kind of get away with people not seeing you for a long time. This is in downtown occupied Paris. She was carrying that 30-pound suitcase around Paris, moving from location to location to location, changing her appearance. Her code name was Madeline. And the Nazis, unfortunately, caught on quite fast. Her entire network was compromised except for her. Her entire network was taken to a Nazi prison. She was encouraged by her superiors to return to England. Much like Virginia, she said, absolutely not. I will not be returning. I will be staying right here where you left me and continuing to serve my country. Her superiors were absolutely wrong. She was great at her job, and she was the only operative left in her network at the time. Unfortunately, she was sold out. She was sold out by somebody very close to her. She was sold out for 100,000 francs, and the Nazis knew her location within minutes. They went in, they arrested her, and Noor was put into a Nazi prison for a period of about 10 months. She was tortured. She was interrogated. Over that period of 10 months, she did not give up a single piece of information. So not overburdened with brains, I find that hard to believe. Unfortunately, Noor was then transferred to Dachau, where she was killed in 1944. And her last words were, liberté. And lastly, I want to talk about Josephine Baker. You might Josephine Baker. She was a fantastic performer in the 1920s. She was American-born. She was born in St. Louis in 1906. Hemingway described her as the most sensational woman anyone ever saw, and I tend to agree with him. She was a beautiful performer, one that was very much like the other woman we spoke about, empowered to serve her country. She saw the injustice that was happening in the United States, moved to France, saw the injustice that was happening there, and decided she's got to do something about this. So interestingly enough, she did not operate undercover. Her cover was her fame. So she could move around quite easily, actually, and she could go to big Nazi parties, she could go to big Italian parties, big Japanese parties, and just be Josephine Baker. And they loved her for it because she was an American, and they thought nothing less, they thought nothing of her because she was a black woman from America. They thought she could never be a spy for the enemy, but she was. What you can't see in this photo, this is a beautiful photo of Josephine and one of her pieces of sheet music. What you can't see in this photo is the invisible ink written all over this sheet music. That was how she transferred messages. She traveled around Europe on her sheet music, would use invisible ink and send that back to her handlers in France. Josephine was an amazing woman and actually did survive the war. She survived up into the 70s and was a civil rights leader in the 1960s. She was actually the only woman to do a speech on the March on Washington in 1963. And I love this quote from her. This is from her speech. She said, "I do not lie to you when I tell you I have walked into the palaces of kings and queens and into the houses of presidents and much more," which was very true. "But I could not walk into a hotel in America and get a cup of coffee. and that made me mad. And when I get mad, you know that I open my big mouth. And then look out, because when Josephine opens her mouth, they hear it all around the world. And they sure did. That is so true. Josephine the rest of her days actually in France. She loved France. She raised all of her children in France. But she did come back to America to support the civil rights movement in the 60s. And she was a great leader during that time. Here she is. You can see her. This is her in Washington wearing her French auxiliary uniform. And a little bonus here. This is my favorite story of all time from World War II. This is Barbara Lauer. She was a born woman, American woman. She worked for the OSS Morale Operations Branch, which was essentially a branch of the Office of Strategic Services that's entire purpose was to demoralize the enemy. So this is all psyops. This is psychological operations, which I think is fascinating. She was the organizer of the League of Lonely War Women. So, men, I am sorry for the story I'm about to tell you, but I think it is absolutely hilarious. What she did, she printed out this pamphlet. The pamphlet essentially, I have it all written out here for you, but what it essentially said was, hello, everybody. We are the German women left behind by our husbands, and if you would like to come and spend a night with us, we are very lonely. We would love to cheat on our husbands with you and spend a night with you. She put out these pamphlets all across Germany, especially in German beer halls, and the men of Germany did not like this. They thought that their wives at home were cheating on them, and it completely demoralized them. It was so successful that by the end of the war, when the men came home from service, they came home, pamphlet in hand, ready to confront their wives and girlfriends at home. So this was a fantastically successful operation. Of course, we don't know to what extent it demoralized the German army, but I think it's hilarious. And then just a couple more women here, and then we'll wrap up. This is a segment I like to call, Wait, She Was a Spy? So we've got two women here. Julia. Yes, so these women weren't actually, I have to be clear here, they weren't actually spies per se. They worked for the OSS or did jobs for them. So they worked in intelligence, but they were never dropped into enemy territory, were never put into situations sort of like we've been talking about. They worked mostly from their home fronts. So Julia Child, this is a wonderful story. She worked for the OSS, and she worked for a special unit called the Emergency Sea Rescue Equipment Section. What did she do? She developed a recipe for shark repellent. So the idea was to have Julia Child develop something that folks could rub on that drowned soldiers or drowned airmen or drowned Navymen on their uniforms that would repel sharks. The recipe was something along the lines of what the ingredients would be from a dead shark. So it was a bunch of chemicals that she put together. Was it successful? Sort of. The reports say that it mildly repelled sharks, but nothing really to the extent that I think they were hoping for. But after the war, she said that this was her first ever recipe, and the rest is history, of course. And this is Erin Dietrick. I'm sure you all know her. She was a very famous German singer and dancer. She did work for the OSS with an operation called Operation Music. So what she did was she recorded a bunch of German songs. She recorded a bunch of German songs with slightly changed lyrics that would hopefully demoralize their German people who were listening on the radio. She put out a ton of albums for the OSS that were intended to get into the minds of German soldiers. Listen to her music and think, wait a second, she's talking about freedom and being nice, So it was that was a really fantastic program. Operation Music was part of the Morale Operations Branch, which Barbara Lauer's headed in our previous slide. So I've got one more kind of exciting thing for you all. This is actually this is top. This has never been. announced to the public. This is the first time that the Spy Museum is sharing this information. When Ian came to me a couple months ago and said, would you like to do a presentation on Virginia Hall? I said, absolutely. What I didn't know, that was about a month later, we would announce at the Spy Museum that we would redo one of our exhibits in the first gallery of our museum to be Virginia Hall. So I talked to all of our folks at the museum, and I said, can I share this with the people of Hamilton? And they said, absolutely. So I am going to ask, just, don't take any photos. If anybody asks, you never heard about this, okay? So our exhibitions team has worked very, very hard over the past couple of months, completely redoing one of our islands in the exhibit called Spies and Spy Masters to be for Virginia, to highlight her story and to share the amazing work that she did during the Second World War with the thousands of people that come through our museum every day. So we've gone from this, which I know you can't see, hopefully you can see it a little bit better, to this. So this is our new exhibit. This is our exhibit that highlights Virginia. I want to highlight a couple of things. You can see the Pyrenees Mountains. Virginia escaped over the Pyrenees Mountains. First time she escaped occupied Europe. You can see a couple of really cool artifacts. You can see a great video that we're going to show on her, and you can see a really interesting interactive. So it's a beautiful exhibit. And when I asked our exhibitions team, what do you want me to share with the people of Ohio? They wanted me to share that when they were building this exhibit, they wanted to share Virginia's story just as an accurate history. They didn't want it to be, a story, a feminist story of a woman that overcame all of the, tragedies of being a woman. Tell her story, and they wanted to tell it in an accurate way that honored the work that she did. Something that Sonia said yesterday was the story of Virginia Hall is not a feminist story, it is an accurate story, and I love that, and that's what we've tried to represent here, and this is what we'll be putting up. This will be in the museum by the end of the year. We've done this by adding a couple new really awesome artifacts. This is actually her uniform from when she was a French ambulance driver. This was given to us by the mayor of Barnesville, Maryland, who got it at an auction. She said, she has got a really cool artifact, and this is the perfect time to hand it over to us. So we're so lucky to have this. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and it'll be highlighted in the new exhibition. And we've got a couple new photographs. I love this postcard here, which is a postcard from when Virginia was serving in Poland. You remember she was serving as a clerk in Poland. This is a postcard back to her family the day that the Nazis invaded Poland. This is currently at the CIA Museum, and my favorite line in this is, "I am staying." And that is so true. She did stay, and she truly, all of the Allied powers owe her a debt of gratitude for the service that she did. The gentlemen here were people that worked with her. Unfortunately, days after this photograph was taken, they were caught by the Nazi powers and were executed. And then remember this photograph? So we've got this really awesome interactive. I love to highlight this because company, they do excellent work where we are getting a copy of the painting by Jeffrey Bass. This is currently at the CIA Museum, and it will be a tactile interactive where basically this is great for blind and visually impaired folks, but it's also great for anybody because you can go up to it, touch it, and at certain points in the painting, it'll play some audio about that certain point. So when you touch her leg, which is a feature of the painting here, it'll tell you all about how she lost her leg in that hunting accident. When you run your hand over the radio, you'll tell you about radio operators during the Second World War. So this is an amazing interactive. We are so blessed to have it in our museum, and we're so excited. So the end of this story is that Virginia, at the end, got some well-deserved rest. At the end of her life, she was surrounded by animals. We know she loved animals. She was surrounded by many poodles at the end of her life, and she lived to be about 76 years old. Died in the 80s. So Virginia, at the end of her life, got some nice rest in Maryland. And I hope that, We've shared a little bit about her life, a little bit about other women during the Second World War that served in similar ways as she, but there are so many other women and so many other stories from the Second World War and beyond that we share at the Spy Museum, and I know many of you won't be able to come anytime soon, or maybe we'll never get there, but you can interact with us from afar. We've got tons of virtual programs that I encourage you all to look into. Go to our website, spymuseum.org. You can find all of the fantastic programming that we do, most of which can be virtual, so we do a lot of in-person, but they are always streamed. So please look into that. We have programs almost every week. And of course, we have our podcast, and we have an online digital learning headquarters where you can see a ton of artifacts that we have. You can search through, let your curiosity run wild, and learn more about the fantastic people that have served this country and beyond. So thank you so much, everybody. This encourages you to sort of get curious and explore some more, folks. There are so many great stories, like I said, and I'm happy to share just a couple of them with you all today. So thank you so much, guys, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Erin. We've got time for just a couple of questions. Questions? Look at that. They're all stunned into silence. In awe. Questions? Anyone? Shark repellent? That almost... I'd like to be the guy in the water with that one.
I think if nothing else, it kind of gave you a little bit of confidence that maybe a shark wouldn't eat you.
Yes. Was Josephine Baker ever suspected at all?
That's a great question. I believe she was, but because of her fame and because of the sort of stature that she had, it was difficult to accuse somebody of that stature and that foreign. People loved her all around the world. So if the Nazis had come after her, that would have been dangerous for them and her. I believe that she was never suspected to the point where she was questioned ever. So she was very successful. Yeah.
Gonna make me work. Gonna get my steps in today. Get that guy on camera.
We'll get my good side. Are there any good movies that someone can watch and learn a little about being a spy? I can't imagine the movie Spies Like Us is very real to life with those guys. Great movie, not very real. Is there good movies that people can watch?
So I will say, sort of like I said in the beginning, movies give us a very skewed perception of spying and what spying is. Movies sort of tell us that 1% of spying is the 100% of spying, which it absolutely is not. But movies can tell us a couple of good things. There are a couple of great movies. Of course, I will never tell you not to watch the James Bond movies. Since I've started working, I have educated myself and watched 2 James Bond movies. I'll never tell you not to watch Bond, but it is not an accurate representation at all. I would say a couple of really great ones. We were talking about The Imitation Game, which is the great retelling of Alan Turing during the Second World War and the work he did with many others at Bletchley Park, Breaking Enigma. That is a great movie. There's a movie on Netflix called oh my gosh. No, there is a movie on Netflix called Mincemeat, Operation Mincemeat. That is a great story. That's a Second World War story as well from British SOE. There's a movie called The Green Prince, which tells the story of a Mossad operative back in the day. Those are all great movies. Black Hawk Down, our executive director, loves that movie. So there are a couple of great movies. But of course, the fun spy movies are good too.
Penny. Any others from the floor? We've got one here. Excuse me, I'm just going to pop through here. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Didn't the actress Hedy Lamarr develop some kind of...
Yes. Hedy Lamarr.
Today?
Hedy Lamarr, oh gosh, I am not going to speak much about this because I admittedly don't know much about her story, but Hedy Lamarr did work for, I believe, the Americans. And I could not tell you what exactly she developed, but she was very much sort of like a Marlene Dietrick or a Josephine Baker, in that she was a famous actress and was able to operate under that cover. So yeah, Hedy Lamarr absolutely was a spy. Yes, broke codes. Great, thank you.
One more question? One more before we finish up? You're all so quiet today. That's mean they've learned a lot. Well, with that, I would like to thank you all for being here today, but most especially for our own homegrown Ohioan. I know we're proud of that, aren't we? Put your hands together. I like that. We like having that. Miss Erin Dietrick and the International Spy Museum, thank you so very much for being here today. And thank you again to our team from One City, One Book for another great read, lots of interesting things, and how exciting about this exhibition that's going to go with Virginia Hall into D.C.
Yeah, please come and see it. It'll be in by the end of the year. So if you come and see us next year, you will see it, and you'll see all the cool new things that we have and the great work that our exhibitions team has done telling her story. So please come and visit us.
Fantastic excuse to get to Washington, D.C. So much to see here at the Fitton Center this October. I could tell you all day, but we are busy nearly every day here with events and music and theater and galleries. So get online, go downstairs, grab a brochure. We'd love to see you here. Of course, coming next month, we have a little Charlie Harper coming in here, and that great artist and the family coming to talk at Celebrating Self. We'd love to see you here at the 19th for We is Greater Than Me for that fantastic 17 Strong exhibition. Thank you for coming out again. Ladies and gentlemen, one more time, Erin Dietrick, the International Spy Museum, One City, One Book, A Woman of No Importance. What a fantastic read and a great event. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.
Kettering Health Hamilton is proud to be the broadcast sponsor of the Celebrating Self series. Kettering Health Hamilton, be your best.